2014, which directly correlates with the Trayvon Martin incident. And it's almost like that's when that whole thing kind of blew up, and it started being in the news a lot, and there was a lot of conversation about it. And so we're definitely seeing consequences of some of these things, and it's good to be aware of. So I have several videos on this, and we're gonna have to go back and forth until I figure out how to click them.
Can I just understand what you said? Are you suggesting that because people are talking about racial tensions, or because racial tensions are being talked about more, that it has resulted in a spike of suicides in the young African American community?
There's a correlation, so there's not a direct cause like I did this because of this.
Yeah.
But when those events were brought into the news,
yeah,
I think there was a lot of, I think part of it's how it's portrayed in the news.
Yeah.
But there's a part of it, I think, that caused a sense of hopelessness. Like, it doesn't matter what I do, this is my lot in life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that just kind of goes back to my earlier question too, is like, should we not talk about our sad stories? So it just kind of really depends on how it's portrayed and like the feelings that your children get
right
from those sad stories.
Like, I would never say don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Because that's not realistic. But I think how we talk about things with our kids.
And how it's portrayed in the news is causing, or assisting.
Maybe.
It has an effect on.
Yeah. But I mean, I would say that's true for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, there are certain news stories that I watch that are facts, and I can watch that, and then there's certain news stories that are meant to enrage you or make you angry or make you sad.
Right.
I mean, you can see that.
Yeah.
It's purposeful.
Okay.
And I think that there's been several stories like that, unfortunately,
Sure.
in a row.
Yeah.
And so not to get off on a soapbox on that whole thing, that's not, but
yeah,
it's an issue. Yeah.
It's real quick. So with the whole Trayvon Martin thing, it's because, and I was in middle school when Trayvon Martin was killed, so I saw that generation of people that have committed suicide. It's not because of anything has changed. It's not because of, you know, what we tell our kids. It's the fact that at the end of the day, some of us just don't want to be killed by police. So instead, we're just going to do what we can, because my generation of youth is very, I didn't ask to be here, so why do I have to deal with this thing? So suicide is a way of taking back the control that has clearly slipped through every crack that's in the mold. So.
Right. So does what I said make sense though?
It does.
Like,
and you said it right, but at the end of the day, we can't not tell our kids what goes on. So especially when it comes to racial stuff, you know, we can't bury 400 years of slavery under the rug. We can't bury Rodney King under the rug. We can't bury the Holocaust under the rug. We have to talk about why things are the way they are, because we can just say, you know, life sucks, the judicial system sucks, it just happened. No, it's the why, because this has clearly been a building thing. So we do have to talk about it. We do have to educate our kids. We do have to say, look, we know you didn't do anything, but unfortunately the system is built against us. This is why, this is how clearly, you know, Japanese people, Jewish people, everybody has been treated that is not of a certain standard. Right. So unfortunately, with our cultures that are not predominantly white, we do have to teach, and that is where our historical trauma comes from, because we can't get away from it. So.
Right. No,
but you said it right.
It's the how and the why.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%.
Because you can tell them, you can take all your feelings out of it and just say, this is what happened, this is what should have been done, this didn't happen. You can take all your emotion out of it. It doesn't change the fact that, you know,
that it is what it is.
So at the end of the day, it's kind of like you can take your feelings out of it, but it's black and white anywhere. So.
Well, and I don't mean like don't express your feelings. I just mean like if it's more like therapy for you than it becomes.
Yeah, and you said it, you actually said it right, is that you shouldn't, project, but you also said it right where, we believe in things that our grandparents believe in when we have no idea why. Why is there, I always laugh to say racism should have been died off, but clearly we still have to deal with that, and it's kind of like, why? Because it's taught and not learned.
Yes, and not intentionally sometimes.
Definitely, and it's a generational thing. So you've got people, like I joke about Texans having country accents. Most people that are Texan don't have country accents unless you come from the East Texas and whatnot. I said so it's the same concept of who's teaching you what.
Right.
Who taught you English? That's why you say it like that.
Yeah.
So,
Almost got on my feelings, Jordan.
I'm sorry, Scott, but to be honest with you, we all don't talk. Matthew McConaughey is the prime example of Texas
I still love you.
accents that we have. Like Louisiana, they all talk like that because that's how they were taught. Who teaches you determines how you live and how you learn. So at the end of the day, we can't escape it, unfortunately. It's just a cycle, which is why we're here.
Yeah, this is true. Hopefully, if we can become aware of it, though, we can do better. That's the hope. Right? Okay, so I'll give you an example.
That we can do better as y'all as advocates dealing with these things.
Right.
And if
That's
our
remember,
kids,
that's our
that for
focus.
certain.
That
if
is
we
our
can
focus.
teach our kids to recognize and connect the dots. So, I'll give you an example. My dad was very prejudiced when I was younger against Hispanic people. My best friend, two of my best friends were Hispanic, and I could not understand. And my mom was finally like, look, Stephanie, when your dad was in high school, there was a group of Hispanic boys that jumped him. They beat him nearly to death. So he does not trust them. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I still like my friends, but at least I understand why he's not happy about that, right? So if we can connect the dots and make sense of some things, then we can try to heal moving forward.
Right. And I the only other thing that I will say that I don't agree with is when you're like, your grandparents have the right to feel the way they feel. Your dad was right to be kind of apprehensive about those Hispanic people, but as a marginalized, generalizing a group of people has never been healthy for anybody. And luckily you have some kids that can see past, that little box their parents are in, but the problem becomes when nobody can see past the little box that they're in, which is why the idea that we're all gonna sing Kumbaya at the end of the day is
Probably not.
Go back to the American Indian, where the racist has been around for a long time.
Yes.
And the Jewish and
It's
which is sad.
It
People ought not to look at race, they should look at attitude.
Yes, but it is what it is. So I do have 3 videos that I think are perspective from their different perspectives.
My father's early experience of, basically watching his parents die because they were not allowed to go to the hospital because there were no hospitals for Black people. The trauma from that, my father being left an orphan with his younger brother, had a huge impact on him and then consequently on me. That was one of the earliest experiences connected to my father. The next would be my experience of being a part of the Operation Exodus program and being bused. There were only 20 of us that went to this particular school. Being in a Black community and then suddenly you're plucked out of that and you're on this yellow bus and it rocks up to the school where everybody was going white. And suddenly I became an other. And so I was often accused of cheating. I was often shamed in front of the class. I experienced just repeated incidents, and my sister, who's a couple of years older than me, experienced even more. My brother, Saladin, was assigned to Hyde Park High. There were everyday protests, and people, white folk, men, women, children, standing along the side of the road, swearing, throwing rocks, and the kids having to go through that every single day was extremely traumatizing for them. My sister-in-law tells the story of being on the bus and sitting next to a girl when a brick came through the window, and the glass hit the girl in the eye, and there was a real fear, there's blood streaming down. She's traumatized watching this. That was the kind of thing that the students faced every day on their way to school and coming back home. So there were white students who were actually attending the school. They did come to school, and there were constant fights that would erupt, and the police would have to be called in. It was chaos in the schools. And in other communities like South Boston, where early on, like, the white students just refused to go to school. Charlestown was the same thing. Those kind of things really affect, like, one's perceptions of self, of other. Am I able to trust white people? You know, we're talking in the 70s, and now we fast forward, it's 2019. And what are the ways in which things have changed, and what are the ways in which things are still the same? In some cases, it's not a brick, and it's not a rock, but it's a word. Anyone who's lived long enough, we've heard that before. We've seen it, we've experienced it. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and that's sad. And it's sad when it's not just in the world, but when it's in the church. I came away with a sense of racial trauma, of not feeling secure about who I was as a Black girl. Did I actually have hope in the future? Those things were in question. And so in that school environment, I learned that there was something inherently wrong with me. And no amount of whatever, education, et cetera, was going to fix it.
Yeah, that's hopeless.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that occurred to me when I was working on this presentation, I remember being in school, and we learned about these things in history, but they taught it like it was a million years ago. Right? I mean, my mom was in school. This was not that long ago. So if I was that woman and I was sending my child to school, I don't think I could do it, having experienced that. I wouldn't trust teachers. I wouldn't trust the other kids. I wouldn't trust the administrators. So if you are working with a family and you're working with a student who's having issues at school, it could be because of some of these traumatic experiences. And, you know, like, we've had those parents that come to school and they're very defensive, and, you know, sometimes the attitude is like, oh, this mom again. But it's almost like I can see why you would want to get yourself, like, ready before you went to this awful place based on your experiences. And maybe that's not how it is anymore. Unfortunately, sometimes it still is. Because those same people that are now administrators or teachers, they grew up in the same time, maybe from a different perspective, right? So, like you said, you can't sweep it under the rug or, oh, we're all better now. Because even though we're all making effort, well, most of us, some of us, are making efforts to do better, there's still issues, right? And I think we just have to be conscious of that when we're working with our kids. That there are things that they've experienced, that they continue to experience, that can be really hard. So when we're looking at a situation, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, right? Oh, this one, I don't know why they all of a sudden thought it was inappropriate. And I'm gonna have to remember the time count, because we're not gonna watch the whole thing. It's not inappropriate.
If you haven't already noticed, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and it's become highly politicized here in North America, from the fervent anti-maskers to the President of the United States referring to it as the Chinese virus, the Wuhan flu, Kung flu if you're nasty.
That's why.
And this has led to a massive spike in racial incidences targeted at Asian Americans. In Texas, you have a Burmese family attacked by a knife-wielding man. This included 2 kids, aged 2 and 6. Anyway, the man thought he was going to prevent them from further spreading the virus. In New York, a 39-year-old woman was splashed with acid as she was taking out the garbage. And here in Canada, anti-Asian hate crimes have increased 600% in Vancouver alone. Meanwhile, unemployment claims have increased 6,900% in New York alone for Asian Americans. This is the largest increase of any racial or ethnic group. By comparison, whites have seen increases of 1,800% and 2,100% for Latinx living in New York. So, newsflash from Captain Obvious, there's a lot of racial tension out there. But Asian Americans have been and still are relatively non-existent in the political and cultural discourse. The national focus is still on Black Lives Matter, and I'm not here to argue against that, to put up Asian American discrimination against the systemic racism that Black lives have to face. I mean, racial trauma is not a competitive sport. This isn't about who takes the podium at the racist Olympics. It's just that while Asian American sentiment has spiked recently, this is nothing new in North America. Let's not forget the Japanese internment camps, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first immigration law that prevented a specific race from entering the United States, or that incident in 1871 where 500 Angelenos stormed Chinatown to torture and hang 18 Chinese men and boys, the largest mass lynching in American history, over a rumor that some Chinese had attacked and killed a white police officer. But lately, as Kathy Park Hong writes in her book, Minor Feelings, Asian Americans occupy this weird purgatorial space. We're distrusted by African Americans, but mostly ignored by whites, unless we're pointed to as a useful tool to justify inaction towards civil rights. It's this idea of the model minority, that Asian Americans work hard, mind their own business, don't complain. It is offered up as proof that there's no such thing as racial inequities, while happily omitting the fact that immigration policies really strove for a long time to only admit visas to Asian Americans that were highly educated and professional. So Asian Americans, we're seen as emotionless functionaries. We lack presence. We take up apologetic space. We're essentially Canadians.
So I like that he's talking about racial disparities and then he makes fun of Canadians, but there's a lot of things that are mentioned in there that I don't even remember learning about in my history class, and I would have no idea that there would be any reason for, and on top of that, at least in this community, I never went to school with an Asian American, and here in Huntsville, the entire time I was a counselor, I think I had 2 students. So there's not like a large population. Imagine how like lonely that's got to be the only one, really in Huntsville. Like, I know when I was at the intermediate, we had one coded Asian American student. That's it. And I think her parents still spoke their native language. Like, that's got to be hard. Okay, and then lastly,
what I grew up with, maybe I saw it as something that was kind of shameful or in the way. I wanted to dress like my friends in America. I wanted to talk like them. I wanted to be like them, listen to the same music. I started listening to country music.
I got all these crazy questions like, did you come here in a canoe? And do you know what snow is? And do you live in a hut in Puerto Rico?
I thought my name was Spick until I was about 13.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first awareness that race was an issue.
People say, oh, you look like a white dude. In some contexts, not in all contexts. Depends where I am, depends who I'm with, depends whole lot of things. Depends what language I'm speaking. But however I look, when I leave my name, I can't get a phone call back about an apartment in New York City. And this isn't like 10 places I call, this is like 30.
And I remember telling a kid one time, I was like, let me tell you, Ku Klux Klan comes here, and they see your last name, you're going too, bro. You know? And the kids are like, what are you talking about? And it was like a big thing.
People generally, you know, unless I speak Spanish, you know, people assume right away, I mean, that I'm African American, that I'm black. You know, I mean, it's you know, just one of those things. It may be the deep voice, it may be the color of my skin.
Because I talk white, I'm not Dominican, or I'm not black, or I'm not Afro-Latina, or whoever people perceive me as of being. And that hurt, and that still hurts.
So a lot of identity stuff going on in that community. I think because they kind of get lumped into one group, even though they're from such vast different backgrounds. And then I do remember one of my good friends in high school was Hispanic, but she was a cheerleader and she, you know, did all the things, and they would always call her an Oreo because she was brown on the outside and white on the inside, and like that being like, they were mean to her because she didn't act the way they thought she should act. I don't know. So there's not, we can't ignore it. We can't act like it doesn't happen. We can't say, oh, well, we're better than that now. I think we have to be aware that our kids deal with these things and that they may be dealing with them on a larger scale than we're aware of. So just going over really quickly, categories of trauma. So there's acute, which is a single isolated event. So that's like a car accident or a natural disaster or a single act of violence or sudden unexpected loss. Chronic traumatic experiences are those that are repeated or prolonged. So that's prolonged family or community violence, long-term illness, chronic poverty, chronic abuse, bullying. And then complex is exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age, often within the caregiving system or without adequate adult support, that has short and long-term effects in many areas. That's a really long explanation of that. But examples of that would be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, ongoing neglect, witnessing domestic violence, things that are ongoing from an early age. Okay, I just like this quote. It isn't in my past, it is in my everyday. We can't ever look at someone and say, well, that happened when you were 2, so there's no reason to be upset about that now, because that's just not reality. People that have experienced trauma, it doesn't just go away. This is a really important slide. So this is the prevalence of childhood trauma. So 2 out of 3 children and youth were exposed to violence in the past year. So that's, if you're looking at a classroom of 30, that's 20 out of the 30 kids. We're not talking a small number. That's a lot. That's the majority, right? What happens to kids? They do what? They react. They grow up, right? So then by reasoning, if 2 out of 3 kids have experienced something traumatic, then 2 out of 3 adults have, right? I make that point with teachers a lot because I think it's important for teachers to recognize that they have trauma too. And sometimes their trauma reactions are triggered by some of the kids they work with. And it's important to recognize that. 1 in 5 adults report 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. There was a whole study done, the ACEs. There's another really good book if you guys like to read or if you do audiobooks. It's The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke-Harris. And the science behind ACEs is just fascinating to me. And we're going to talk about the brain science next.
Can you tell me again what ACEs means?
Adverse childhood experiences. And there's like a list of 10 or less things that they did this huge study on, and they related it to health outcomes, like physical health outcomes. And the higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to have heart disease or stroke because of the physical things that happen due to prolonged toxic stress.
And who is the author of The Deepest Well?
Nadine Burke-Harris. So this won't be surprising, but groups that are at increased risk for exposure to trauma. So African American youth living in urban low-income communities, LGBTQ children and youth who are homeless and living in poverty, children and youth with disabilities. I have a totally separate training about that one. And then American Indian or Alaskan Native children and youth, and then youth of color ages 12 to 19 are all at increased risk for exposure to trauma for various reasons.
I mean, being 6 is 6 when I was a kid.
Can you say that again?
Right? Duet?
I can't hear.
I think she said I was like a 6 out of 6.
I'm 6 out of 6 on this board.
Okay. Okay.
You're probably gonna like the next part.
I probably do.
Yeah.
I like this kind of stuff.
So, just summary, experiences become traumatic when they overwhelm our ability to cope. Traumatic experiences come in many forms, and I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I think it's important to recognize the many things that can cause trauma. Exposure to childhood trauma is very common. It's the majority, not the minority. Risk for exposure to more than one type of trauma is high, and contextual factors can increase the risk of trauma. All right, so we have an activity. It's really short and easy. It's in your folder on your right side. I always have to do this. So for each scenario below, just use the chart, and you should have a little chart like this in there. And discuss with your group what clues might lead you to ask about the student's trauma history. So what type of trauma did they experience, and what clues might lead you to ask about their history?
What chart do you need?
It should be, is it there?
Oh, that one. Oh, it's in the very back. No, that's not it.
It should be, I think it's
Talking about.
There's a list. You have a chart?
Show us that chart again.
I don't think the chart is in here.
okay.
I'll
I
make
apologize
copies.
for that.
Any questions while I'm making copies for?
You
making copies?
She's making.
You don't want me to
Let
make
me
copies?
go back to, I can just go back to the slide. It's right there. If that helps.
This is our chart? I think we're good, Jen.
This right here are the
I
types
already
of
pushed
trauma.
start.
Yeah, acute trauma complex,
Yeah, this.
Here you go.
You are the best.
Yeah, you can look at that also.
You have that chart. That's like the chart.
Here you go.
Need one more.
I'm dead. Do we need one? Okay.
I got you.
Magic.
You're welcome. One more? Okay, I can do one more. Did we use them all up at this table?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, now I don't know what happened with it.
What did I do with it?
Here, you go.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
You were looking at me and I
I already had it. Okay, one more here?
We run the same thing.
Yes.
No,
I
ma'am.
think we all did. Any, you said yes here? Yes. Everyone here have one?
Yeah, you guys can talk. It's not a test. Feel free to discuss.
Share with each other, discuss.
Fatigue, food hoarding, diabetes.
Full screen. Yeah, I wasn't that probably until I had to watch that.
Yeah, okay.
That one time, like, it was totally fine, and then one day we were presenting, and it was like, this is
Because we're supposed to use the chart
Yeah.
to fill in the.
And I'll,
It's actually two
Because this
different
just
areas.
says.
if you need me to hit buttons, let me know. And here's teachers. I almost heard a voice over here.
Yes.
We're discussing.
Or
And, you know, how about parents?
why not, right?
Why not? If all else fails.
I did see it. I do. I know. I'm so humbled.
Oh. Are you still with it? What happened to you while you were scared?
Yes.
This could be.
It's so good.
Yeah, we're actually gonna order like 5 for the office, because I said every staff member needs to read it and every
Yes.
advocate needs to read it.
Yes, it's huge.
Yeah.
So he talked, I love the waivers period, when he very first started.
Right.
Like that's very things.
Ah.
To where it makes sense. Lizzie Berger was like, I loved her, but she acted the audience. But she does not into that.
Yeah, and he touches, but yeah.
But even hers, I was
Yeah.
like, sometimes it's like she did a whole study with tab levels and like
stress hormones. Yeah, I think Tony read the body keeps score. He said she had to get.
Yes, yeah, he's a lot, but, I did the audio book for and Oprah's heard about driving.
Yeah, it's interesting reading it as a conversation. But yeah, I really think everyone needs to.
Absolutely, I've been trying to like do therapy with my mom.
Actually, a lot of kids don't get their driver's license anymore. It's very common, so they don't have to do it. At least it wasn't done. But at that point, it would just be.
So crazy
Reaction
like I
doesn't
was in
necessarily match
all
what
kinds of
it is.
physical therapy and all this stuff that's her.
Yeah.
Scope braces, like all this stuff, and then
Yeah,
it's
it's
her,
great.
and it just kind of, you know what I mean? And then I've had some flare-ups, and from time to time, but for the most part. Yeah, I think I was the one pulled.
Do you guys wanna talk about Jared?
Temperature, and they couldn't figure
You
out.
ready to talk
Yeah.
about Are you finished reading Jared?
And I do remember
Me personally,
when I was
not wanting
So
to.
Jared has 9 in the 3rd grade.
so much.
Just taking the bus.
I don't know who I am, like if I'm his teacher or like, yeah, I'm an adult in his class.
Yeah.
It says, what clues would lead you to ask about Jared's history and who would you ask?
Pregnant, and they make you drink that. Oh,
The target is coming in late.
that's perfect timing.
Sleeping
Russ can
in
rock
the
this and
class,
it's great.
not sleeping or anything.
So would you ask Jared, would you
One
ask?
person.
Not only that it is a real ride with people, but she's.
Well, I'd go to the counselor
Well, do you count all the things that you're playing
Yes, because I had to
You
get.
start with counselor.
I've done my mom's
In all seriousness.
Did you get your backpack?
I went
Your backpack.
At that time, it's been several years ago, was very
I
responsive. I can't count for any of the
Probably like officially when I was
Huh?
like 18, because I started doing ABA therapy for a therapist,
Yeah.
or not therapist, one of the
And so
professors
is
his son had also.
assistant person.
And then,
Yeah.
I was doing that, and then I worked in health trade center.
The straight.
Yes, she was there.
If a kid showed up to school crying, would you ask the kid?
In that area.
You jump straight.
Yeah.
And
First, it was
the
psychological.
key there, I think, is not
Yeah.
to say what's
Well,
wrong.
it started, so my younger brother,
The
my
key
youngest
is
brother.
to say what happened to.
I started taking
Yeah.
sped classes, so that I could help my mom. And then,
Yeah, that's one thing that she said earlier in the training is she
and
said,
then I liked it.
it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's
Psychology
happened to
definitely
them.
ropes you in if you write most of it.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second part,
I did take a brief break.
Are you sure?
Celebrate.
Well, and then it starts like 3 times, and now it's.
And then,
What?
and I went through the state until they were gonna
so if your
read
kid
it.
had like all of
I'll
the
use my degree.
things that Jared's got going on, and
Yeah, that psychology is like a
your
tree.
teacher and you see that he's just crying, and you've not engaged with the counselor,
Just like the science
would
part
you,
of
do you
it.
think that you go to the counselor?
Yeah,
Do you think that you go to